We do not understand God's reckoning of time, but we also have been shut out from understanding the feast of the Lord, which the New Testament says are all shadow pictures of good things to come.
The Prophecies in the Feast of the Lord, presented by Michael Rood.
Shalom. I'm Michael Rood, and I am in Ophel Gardens at the southwest corner of the retaining wall that surrounds the Temple Mount in the ancient city of Jerusalem. More than 3,000 years ago, David ben Yesse, the king of Israel, purchased this very mountaintop upon which to build a temple to the living God. These giant stones, which make up the retaining wall, are embedded into Mount Moriah, in Hebrew, Har Moriah. More, teacher, Yah, the holy name of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Mount Moriah, the mountain where Yahweh will be our teacher. It is upon this mountain that Abraham rehearsed the sacrifice of his son Isaac, but was provided a male lamb of the first year as the substitute for his son. It was upon this mountain that David set a tabernacle to house the Ark of the Covenant. It was here on Mount Moriah that David saw by revelation details of the coming of the Messiah, who would be one of his future descendants. It was here on this mountain that King David set in place detailed rehearsals for the temple service, rehearsals that foretold exactly what the Messiah would accomplish here in the city of Jerusalem when he came to redeem his people from the consequences of their sins. Moses and then later King David set in place these detailed rehearsals as shadow pictures of good things to come that the Messiah must accomplish. This is the very location where these rehearsals have been and will be fulfilled by the Messiah. Join us in the Lester Summerall television studios where this multimedia presentation was recorded by the Prophecy Club. This is Bible Prophecy 101. Now, Episode 1 in the 26-part series on the prophecies in the Feast of the Lord, Sodom and Gomorrah, found.
What appeared to be distant rock formations out in the middle of the Israeli desert turns out that the entire city of Gomorrah has been found, still intact, still standing. Here at the base of Mount Masada, between Masada and the Dead Sea, you can see the ashen remains of the cities of the plains, and in the background, you can see two elongated pyramid-shaped objects. Now, 90-degree angles don't happen in nature, but here in the Judean wilderness are edifices that are the same length, width, depth, height, and angle of incline that open up the way into the temple site area. And just as the book of Deuteronomy says, nothing remains of the cities of the plains except for brimstone, salt, and ashes, and nothing grows thereon. And there outside of the main population of Jerusalem, and as you're looking back at Mount Masada and Herod's veranda in the distance, you see the ashes and the ashen city that remains before you. There's Bruce Brimstone Brill, as we refer to him respectfully, holding several pieces of brimstone that we secured just this last time when we were out during the Feast of Pesach, or Passover. And you see the ashes in the background as he's holding the brimstone in his hands. Now, the brimstone, it says that it rained down or hailed down out of heaven on the cities of the plains, destroying them. And in the ashen remains, you can see how that it has the pattern as the brimstone rained down, and then the ashes snuffed it out so that these chunks of brimstone, which are 95.72% pure sulfur, still remain to this very day. There are sphinx-shaped objects, pyramid-shaped objects that continue to erode year by year as we go out there at least twice a year, and there I am in my desert gear with the temperatures reaching over 120 degrees down at the lowest point of planet Earth. It's quite inhospitable. And this is the reason that a lot of people don't go out there. Those are lion paw prints. Now, lions prowl the desert remains out there, and there are the paw prints of a lioness and her two cubs. And as you know, lions out there eat desert gazelle, and we're a lot slower than any desert gazelle I've ever seen. And here you see the body and the four paw prints of a lion which was laying down in the ashes out there. And that's the reason why every night before sundown we're behind the nylon screen walls of our tent, because we know nylon keeps out lions. But if that doesn't work, my daughter's holding an M16 full automatic, and Bruce has a 357 on his side. And so when we go out there, we try to be a little bit more prepared. But there it is, what Simon Peter spoke of. Simon Peter spoke of the cities of the plain, Sodom and Gomorrah, as God has left a visible example in the earth of his righteous judgments. And just as God does not rain fire and brimstone down on every generation in which there's gross wickedness, and of course we happened to see Washington, D.C. on television on the news last night, which is certain proof that God doesn't rain fire and brimstone down on every wicked generation immediately, but God did leave a testimony in the earth that God is the judge. And it is a testimony to all those who would live an ungodly life. I have in my hands one of the pieces of brimstone that was recovered from the city of Gomorrah. In fact, I have the world's largest privately held collection of brimstone on planet Earth outside of the city of Gomorrah. And this piece of brimstone is 95.72% pure sulfur. 3 of their trace metals in it. It burns extremely hot. In fact, we made the mistake of ill-advisedly lighting up a small piece when I got back into Jerusalem several years ago. Lit a small piece down in the basement, the lower level of a hostel there in the Jewish quarter. When we began choking and gagging, then we evacuated the building, got the brimstone out there, because all of a sudden it felt like what we were inhaling was very deadly, and it was. And so we got it out on the street, let it burn out, and that was the last time we lit up a piece indoors. But this is what God has left, this testimony in the earth. And as the city began to then collapse, as the ashen remains snuffed it out, what is left for us today are the remains, these visible remains of God's righteous judgment. But it is not just a reminder of God's judgment against the wicked, but it says that it is also an ensample to the righteous, that God is able to deliver the righteous in the day of judgment. So this piece of brimstone is good news and it's bad news. It just depends on where you are in relationship to the Creator of the heavens and the earth. And it is in this period of time that God said that he would leave a reminder in the earth, that Josephus spoke of it as common knowledge in his day. Of course, Simon Peter spoke of it, and it has been recently found again since Israel came back into their own land in this last generation, and since Israel is now inhabiting that part of the world again. And as it says further in Peter, he said, that knowing this, that in the last days scoffers will come. And within the context of what he was speaking in 2 Peter chapter 3, this in the last days, these scoffers would not only be believers, but they would be people who would be considered as ministers within the body of believers. And these men would be walking after their own lust, or taking care of themselves, making sure that what they got out of it was feathering their own nest. And it says that these scoffers would be walking after their own lust and scoffing, saying, "Where is this promise coming? Since the fathers fell asleep, everything continues going on the way it always has. This they will willingly be ignorant," he said. God judged the world in the days of Noah, and he'll judge the world again. In the days of Noah, he shook the foundations of the earth, but this next time, he's going to shake the heavens as well. Everything that can be shaken is about to be shaken. The only thing that's going to be left standing are those things which are grounded and founded on a rock and cannot be moved, cannot be shaken. But make no mistake, it is God who is going to do the shaking, and he's doing it for a reason. Just as Yahshua said in the Gospels, that when the wind blows and when the waves roll, it didn't say if, it says when they do, because there is a time in which God is going to shake things loose, and it is concerning the last days in which God has left a testimony. And I am always amazed as we travel around the United States and as we present some of these different archaeological finds that have now come to light just in the last generation, and most of them since the time that Israel took back the city of Jerusalem since 1967. And we see that just as Peter said, that they will willingly be ignorant in the last days, as we've toured around the United States with not only the pieces of brimstone, but also inviting the the archaeologists that found Noah's Ark, that is noted by the Turkish government for the find of Noah's Ark, that we were amazed at when we were on radio and television how few people would actually go out of their way to be able to find out and be able to hold in their hands pieces of Noah's Ark, petrified remains of Noah's Ark that exist to this very day. Because it was in the late 1950s that a boat-shaped object appeared in a field in northern Turkey in the mountains of Rood. And then it was in 1978 that an earthquake took place in northern Turkey, and that earthquake went right straight down the middle of that boat-shaped object. You can still see the fissure line in it today. And what happened is that by an earthquake, in 1 minute, what happened is that it shook all the earth away around the sides of this boat-shaped object, exposing 30 to 50 feet of the horizontal deck support timbers and the rib timbers of the petrified remains of Noah's Ark. And in 1 minute, God excavated the Ark of Noah more in 1 minute than what archaeologists could do in 100 years with modern equipment. God is the one that is in charge, and He has left this testimony in the earth in the last days. And as we have been going around the country presenting these different evidences and seeing that instead of hundreds of thousands of people coming out, there would just be a few hundred. While most people stayed at home watching television, immersed in the sports or whatever it was, and it's always a disappointment to see how many people come out to see these things. But it's never a disappointment in who comes out, because God has called His people in the last days. He has let them know that there is something very significant that is about to shake loose. And in just the last few years, we have seen it in which so many people, so many groups around the country and around this part of the world, that all of a sudden the feast of the Lord have become very important to them. It's become very significant to them, but they have not known why. And so now in these last days, God is bringing forth these things so that we can understand them. Now, as Peter went on in this, he said that in the last days that they will willingly be ignorant, and that God is going to shake the heavens and the earth this next time. In the days of Noah, He shook the earth. This next time, it is going to shake loose. And it says that God is not slack concerning His promises of judgment. When it looks as though life is continuing on as it always has, but God isn't slack concerning those promises of judgment spoken by the Hebrew prophet. God is long-suffering. He's not willing that any should perish. But then Peter makes one prophetic statement concerning the last days and the promised return of the Messiah. And there is only one statement that he makes, and one thing he says that we are not to be ignorant of. And he says, this we are not to be ignorant, that a day with the Lord is as a millennium, or 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as a day. Shimon Kepha, Simon Peter, was speaking the very same thing that the Hebrew rabbis have taught for thousands of years. In that God created the heavens and the earth in 6 days, and on the seventh day He rested. What that means is that man will have his time of rule and reign on the earth for 6,000 years. The Messiah will reign in the seventh or the Sabbath millennium, the day or the millennium of the Lord. In the book of Barnabas, who was a first century Jewish follower of Yahshua of Nazareth, he also stated the same thing, in that God created the heavens and the earth in 6 days, the seventh day rested. He said that the Messiah will reign in the seventh or Sabbath millennium, the day or the millennium of the Lord, as it is understood throughout the Hebrew Scriptures. The first century Jewish followers of the Messiah were under no delusion that the Messiah would be returning at any moment. That, for the most part, is a Western Gentile Christian fabrication that has been extrapolated out of theological training rather than from the Holy Scriptures. And so it is that God has left a testimony for this period of time, saying a day with the Lord is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as is a day. Now, we, for the most part, in this part of the world, are not taught basic math, especially in church. Because if we cannot get 3 days and 3 nights between Good Friday and Easter Sunday, there's like no hope that we would be able to do any advanced mathematical calculations. But we're going to do some of those today. because we see that just as Adam's first year was the year 1, and the first millennium was the year 1 through the year 1000, then the second millennium was the year 1001 through 2000, third 2001 through 3000, that by the time we get to the year 6001, that is when the seventh or the Sabbath millennium, the day or the millennium of the Lord begins. And we also see that picture right back in Bereshit, back in Genesis, in which it says that God spoke to Adam and said, "In the day you eat thereof, thou shalt surely die." But yet we see that Adam lived for 930 years. How do we reconcile that? It's because we know that a day with the Lord is as 1,000 years is as a day. Adam was created to live forever, but he died in the day or the millennium in which he was created, and from that point on, no one, even though Methuselah came close at a lifespan of 969 years, no one has ever lived past the day, even right from the very beginning. And so God said it right in Genesis and showed how that prophetic shadow picture is going to be seen throughout the scriptures and through the feast of the Lord, the spring feast and the fall feast. We are going to see how these all play in a part. Now, according to the modern Jewish calendar, it is currently the year 5760. The year 5760 would indicate that we are at least 240 years away from the beginning of the seventh or the Sabbath millennium. But there are no Jewish scholars on the planet today that dispute the fact that years have been subtracted from the total elapsed time calendar. We all know that years were subtracted. The question is, how many years? It's the noted Jewish rabbi, Shimon Schwab, who stated that he could prove that there are at least 165 years missing from the total elapsed time calendar, and perhaps many more. So the question remains, what year is it? Now, among the Western Gentile or the Christian chronologists, there are none that really would argue with this following statement, that creation was around the year 4000 BCE, 4000 BC. And here we are now around the year 2000 of the Common Era. Now, any second grader would be able to add this together and see that 4000 BCE and 2000 of the Common Era would bring us to around the year 6000 at this point. But we're not taught the basic premise and understanding of the Hebrew Scriptures that a day with the Lord is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as a day. And so it is that we are going to look at God's reckoning of time and understand these things from the biblical perspective, from the Hebrew perspective, because we are living in God's universe. The world in which we live is synchronized to God's calendar and God's time clock. Whether we know about it or not does not make any difference. God does not spin the universe around what we don't understand. I learned that several years ago. If I don't understand it, then it seems to just keep on rolling right over me at times if I get in the way. But God's reckoning of time, clearly outlined in the Hebrew Scriptures, we have completely forsaken in the West. We have inherited and adopted a pagan reckoning of time, which is completely out of focus of God's reckoning of time. In the Western world, every day of the week is named after a different pagan god. Every month of the year is named after a different fallen angel, a different god. From Janus, the two-headed god, all the way to August, Caesar Augustus, the god of the Roman Empire. And so it is that we have inherited a pagan reckoning of time and have completely forsaken God's reckoning clearly outlined in the Hebrew Scriptures. Even the Western world in America, which purports to believe that the Bible is the Word of God, has completely forsaken God's reckoning. It's as if the hands have been broken from the face of the clock. We don't know what time it is, but God knows what time it is, and He has a plan and a promise. And when the seventh or Sabbath millennium begins, we are going to see some incredible events as we come to the seventh month of the seventh millennium, because the seventh month feast will be fulfilled when the day or millennium of the Lord begins. And we find ourselves right on the cusp of this at this point. It was 3 years ago that I presented and defended in Jerusalem the first astronomically corrected biblical Hebrew calendar since the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. And it was Rabbi Hillel II in the 4th century that made advanced mathematical and astronomical calculations when we no longer lived in the land of Israel. And those calculations were made so that we could have a projected calendar that could be used with his people being scattered over 3 continents. And so when we weren't in the land and couldn't keep God's original reckoning of time, then an alternative calendar was produced that at the time was extremely accurate. But now, 1,600 years later, those calculations were not accurate enough to keep the calendar on track over the long duration with which it's been in use. And so where we find ourselves at this particular point in time is that most of the time we are celebrating the feast days on the wrong day according to the modern Jewish calendar. And many times we're completely in the wrong month according to God's original reckoning of time. Now, whereas this may have been acceptable in generations past, now that we are back in the land, there is no reason why we can't go back to God's original reckoning of time. And also, what we have found ourselves embroiled in and completely immersed in the culture in the West, is that we have inherited pagan celebrations and renamed pagan celebrations, again, which have no basis in truth or reality. Some of them are not even renamed, such as Easter, which is the name of the bare-breasted fertility goddess of the East, who came out of heaven in this giant egg, landing in the Euphrates River at sunrise on the first Sunday after the vernal equinox, busting out, turning a bird into an egg-laying rabbit. And then after that point in time, the priest of Easter would then sacrifice infants and then take the eggs of Easter and dye them in the blood of sacrificed infants. Many of these same traditions are carried on today in the name of those people who say that they're worshiping the true God, but really do not even understand that some of the things that they have inherited and some of these occult holidays have actually been brought into what the Christians consider their church. And so it is that when we have inherited these things, but we find that we have forsaken the feast of the Lord, which are all prophetic shadow pictures of good things to come, we find ourselves again with the hands broken from the face of the clock. We do not understand God's reckoning of time, but we also have been shut out from understanding the feast of the Lord, which the New Testament says are all shadow pictures of good things to come. And so it is that Israel understood for centuries, for generations, that each one of the feasts of the Lord were holy rehearsals, holy convocations, which are holy mikra, or holy rehearsals, that we look back at good things that had happened in the past, such as Passover, when we left Egypt. We understood these things as good things that happened in the past. But yet, until the spring feasts were fulfilled, we did not understand that they were also shadow pictures of what the Messiah would accomplish when the Messiah comes. And so now what we are going to see is get an understanding, a perspective of that. Because we see that in the Gospel of John, Yohanan was a first century Jewish follower of the Jewish Messiah. And it is in his gospel, in his record, that he says, I have not written everything that could be written or should be written. The world wouldn't even be able to contain the scrolls of the things that should be written about Jesus of Nazareth. But he said, but this I have written, that you might know that Yahshua of Nazareth is the Messiah, the only begotten Son of God, and that believing you might have life through his name. Now, how does a Jewish disciple of the Messiah prove in his culture to his people that Yahshua is the Messiah? How does he do it? Of all the things that could and should be written, the world wouldn't be able to contain the scrolls. What is it that he selects, that he uses, that proves that he is Messiah? John shows how Jesus of Nazareth fulfilled the spring feast of the Lord, just as they had been rehearsed every year, year after year, century after century, for over 1,000 years. And that each one of these feasts were a prophetic shadow picture that we were required, Israel was required to go up to Jerusalem to these feasts, to these rehearsals, and every one of these feasts were embedded with an expectation that this could be the time that the Messiah is revealed. And so every time we came to the feast, it was with that expectation, this may be the year. We would come up, we would purify ourselves, we would mikvah or baptize ourselves before the festivities began, expecting that maybe this is the year that the Messiah comes. And we see that the Gospel of John details how Yahshua of Nazareth fulfills every detail of the spring feast just as they've been rehearsed for thousands of years.
Michael Rood will return with some closing thoughts in just a moment.
The four Gospels record how the Messiah fulfilled the prophetic shadow pictures embedded in the spring feast of the Lord, just as they had been rehearsed by the Jewish people from the time of King David until the destruction of the Second Temple by Rome. When we understand the intricacies of these shadow pictures that the Messiah has already fulfilled, we will be prepared to explore the prophetic shadow pictures of good things to come in the future as the Messiah fulfills the fall feast of the Lord, as recorded in the last book of the Hebrew Scriptures, the book of the Revelation. We invite you to join us again next time for Episode 2 in the 26-part series on the prophecies in the Feast of the Lord, A Thief in the Night. This is Michael Rood from Jerusalem bidding you shalom, peace. And I'll see you when the smoke clears.